The first speaker is Dr. Li Kai in the finance department of HKUST. Dr. Li received his PhD in economics from Duke University. His research focuses on asset pricing, microfinance, and financial economics. And he will give a talk on financial intermediation and capital reallocation.
I would like to thank Xianhua and also other conference organizers for bringing me here for this great opportunity. As you can tell that actually the research project I'm going to present takes a quite different approach like our previous presentations. I'm going to use a structural general equilibrium model to establish some important macroeconomic risks which affects real quantities and asset returns. But what I would like to say is that during this afternoon's conference so far, I really learned a lot because I appreciated a lot that the statistics and economics can present such powerful tools for us to present some further empirical evidence for us to think about and to motivate us to seek theoretical motivations and explanations. I think maybe this is a meaning of our IS conference, which brings different approaches, bring different subfields in the finance together. Today I'm going to talk about the impact of financial intermediation on capital reallocation. And this is joint work with Henjie Ai, who is at University of Minnesota, and Fang Yang, who is at Louisiana State University. So the key motivation of this project is to study how financial intermediation affects macroeconomic fluctuations and asset returns in significant ways. And here, in our research project, you can consider the financial intermediation is a fairly broadly defined financial intermediary sector, which consists of all different kinds of financial institutions, like commercial banks, investment banks, hedge funds, mutual funds, private equity funds, and so on and so forth. And we know that it is a very salient feature in the recent financial crisis that the disruptive of the financial intermediary activities is a very important factor for the Great Recession. And after that, there are a lot of new research in the macroeconomic economics or asset prices trying to study why and how significant is the impact of financial intermediation on real economy and asset returns. And what I would like to emphasize is the majority of the literature focus on the impact of the financial intermediation on the formation of new capital. In particular, the logic is when intermediaries get constrained, new investment drops, and therefore capital stock goes down. And if we look at this Cobb-Douglas production function of capital and labor, and capital jobs is going to cause the total output goes down. Okay, so this is the basic logic. However, in the literature, actually there is a heated debate what and how large this channel is going to have on the total output loss. And in particular, we have this cultural culture critique. Why? Because investment is only constituting approximately 10% of the capital stock. Okay? And if, for instance, we have a 10% decline of the investment, actually, after we translate it into the production function, actually, you can see that through some basic calculation, you can see that actually it will only translate into a very small decline in the total output. Okay, so this is a major starting point for our project. Why? Because our project is going to focus on a different perspective of the impact on financial intermediation. Instead of focusing on the formation of the new capital, actually we are going to emphasize actually financial intermediary is going to have an even larger impact on the deployment of the existing capital. The basic idea is that when financial intermediaries get constrained, actually capital cannot flow from the low productive firm to high productive firm. And these are the even more important channel which cause large output loss in the Great Recession period. And we are going to, through very careful quantitative analysis, to show that actually this channel is going to be very important. So there are several important empirical evidence which motivate us for this story. And the first empirical evidence is related to the measure of the capital misallocation. And here, we just take the measure from the literature, Clino and Xie 2009 QJE paper, and we assume that this is a monopolistic competitive market with a decreasing return to scale technology. And from this framework, we can derive actually the total output is in this way. And not only we have exogenous total productivity factor A, but also we have this efficiency measure of the capital reallocation. And these two components are combined together constitute a measure of the measured TFP as we observed from the macroeconomic data. And if we do a first order Taylor approximation, we can see that the log of the efficiency measure actually is proportional to the variance or the dispersion of the marginal product capital across different firms. Actually, this is going to be very easy to understand. Why? Because suppose we are at the first best economy where there is no any inefficiency of capital reallocation. Then at the optimum, marginal product capital is going to be equalized across all the firms. Therefore, this efficiency measure is going to be 1, and there is no any capital misallocation. And on the other hand, in the second best framework, if we see the economy have a higher cross-sectional dispersion in terms of marginal product capital, then it indicates that we have a low efficiency in terms of the capital reallocation. And I would like to show you this figure. So this figure shows the time series pattern of the HP filtered log total factor productivity, which is a solid black line, and also the capital efficiency of the capital reallocation measure, which is the dashed blue line, and also a measure of the capital utilization, which is shown as a red dashed line. And as we can see, the first message from this figure is that the dashed blue line, which is a measure of the efficiency of the capital reallocation from the measure of the cross-section of the market product of capital, actually tracked the log TFP series from the macro information pretty well. And it indicates that actually the capital efficiency of the capital reallocation may captures a large fraction of the fluctuations of the measured TFP. Okay, and the second observation is with respect to this dashed red line. We can see this is a measure of the capital utilization. And in our framework, we consider capital utilization is an extreme form of the inefficiency of the capital reallocation, because it means that some of the productive assets are completely underutilized. And as we can see that actually the economic downturns are typically coincide with large drops in terms of capital utilization. And from this piece of empirical evidence, it motivates us to develop a model in which endogenous variations in efficiency of capital reallocation becomes a very important drivers for the TFP fluctuations. And our second piece of empirical evidence motivates us to link the efficiency of capital reallocation to the financial intermediaries, because you may have this question at the very beginning: why financial intermediary has something to do with the capital misallocation? So in particular here, the dark solid line is plotting the log changes of the bank loans from the banking sector to the non-financial corporate sector. And the dashed line is a measure of the cross-section dispersion of the marginal product of capital. Whenever we see a higher number for the dashed line, it means that it is not very efficient in terms of capital reallocation. And we can see that actually these two lines are displaying very significant negative correlations, which means that in the bad times, when the bank loans declines a lot. Actually, it is corresponding to the inefficiency of the capital reallocation. And this is exactly consistent with our model mechanism, because in our model, we predict that when in the bad times, financial intermediary got constrained, the total amount of bank loans declined, and this caused the inefficiency in terms of the capital reallocation across different productive firms. Or in another word, more productive firms in this state of the world cannot get enough amount of capital to be flowed into these kind of firms, so that it causes economic inefficiency and cause very large output loss. Okay, so this is a basic message from these two figures. And let me provide a very brief summary of the paper. So we have a general equilibrium structural model framework with capital reallocation and the financial intermediation. And with this framework, we establish that actually the financial shocks, which are independently originated from the financial sector, actually generate a very large variations in misallocation and account for large fraction of the macroeconomic fluctuations. However, the amplification for the exogenous TFP shock itself actually quantitatively is very small. And also, this model can endogenously generate counter-cyclical volatility both at the aggregate level as well as in the cross-sectional level. And these are two salient features we observed in the financial market data. And I also would like to mention that actually computation methodology is also one of the contributions of this paper, because in the model, the constraint as the leverage constraint, which I will talk about later on, is only occasionally binding. Therefore, we develop a recursive policy function iteration approach to provide a global solution, so that we can not only look at the steady state dynamics around the steady state, but we can also have a very good characterization of the dynamics of the economic variables in the off steady state, in particular in the crisis dynamics periods. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the literature and jump directly to the model setup. Okay, and I have this flow chart to tell you what is the basic structure of the model. Okay, so in this model, there are three sectors, namely representative household, banking sector, and non-financial firms. Representative household is very standard, so it endowed with W amount of wealth, and at each point in time, the representative household is making optimal decision between how much consumption to consume and how much saving to make. And they can, by assumption, they can only save through the risk-free deposit account with banks. Okay. And I also would like to talk about the second important sector, which is a non-financial firm sector. And we assume that there are a continuum of heterogeneous firms located on different islands. Okay, and these different islands are subject to different idiosyncratic productivity shocks. The reason why we need this island and the island-specific productivity shocks is because these idiosyncratic productivity shocks is going to cause the marginal product of capital for these different firms to be different. Therefore, provide a motivation for capital to flow from low productive firm to high productive firm. Okay, and this is a minimum amount of setup which can provide this kind of incentive for capital flows. Okay. However, we assume that the capitals cannot flow freely across different islands. Instead, on each different island, there is a local bank. And these local banks are essentially doing two things. The first thing is traditional, like in the banking theory, it is doing a maturity transformation. On the one hand, banks obtain short-term risk-free asset from the household sector. And on the other hand, they are providing capitals or providing long-term investment to these non-financial firms. And beyond that, actually, these local banks are also in charge of intermediation of the capitals flow from the low productivity firms to high productive firms. Okay, so this is a basic structure. And if there is no any frictions or constraint between the borrowing and lending of household and the banks, then these banks will going to be very efficient in order to channel the capital from the low productive firm to high productive firm. Therefore, in order to make this problem to be interesting, we need to have introduced some certain kind of financial frictions. And these financial frictions is going to generate all the interesting implications. And in particular, when bad times financial intermediary's own networks got hit, then its intermediation ability is going to get constrained, and therefore the financial capital reallocation is going to get constrained, and therefore high productivity firms are not going to get enough capital stock and capital, and therefore there is an output loss for this economy. Okay, I'm going to talk about it more details in a few seconds. Okay, so the firm's problem is exactly like what I described just now. I'm going to skip. I'm going to talk about here. So in the aggregation, so this phi is denoting the ratio of the capital stock adopted on the high productivity island with respect to the low productivity island. And this phi hat is denoting what is the first best capital reallocation ratio. And as long as this phi is distant from this first best level phi hat, then it indicates an inefficiency of capital reallocation. Okay? And what I would like to point out is that actually in this model, the efficiency margin actually consists of two components. The first component comes from the fact that this capital reallocation ratio is away from the first best level. As you can see, as the phi increase to 1, then we will not have capital misallocation. Okay, capital inefficiency. Okay, and there is another component which I denoted as U here. This is the capital utilization rate, and this is an extreme case of capital misallocation because it means that some of the productive assets are going to be completely underutilized. Instead of putting into these productive firms, they are going to be put into the storage technology, risk-free storage technologies, which earn much lower returns. Okay. Okay, and this is the banking sector problem. And for the banking sector problem, instead of going through these notations and the equations, let me just use this flow chart to emphasize some of the intuitions. And in particular, I would like to emphasize how does the financial frictions make all these interesting implications to happen. Okay, so this is a two-period version of the model. So the banks enter into this economy in period 0 with N0 of amount of the net worth, and also with decision of borrowing BF amount of risk-free debt from the household. And then they are providing capitals to the individual firms. Okay, and the second period, which is period 1, can be decomposed into 4 sub-periods in order for you to develop your intuition. In the first sub-period, the idiosyncratic shocks on different islands materialized, and therefore different islands will have different marginal product capital. And during this sub-period, there is a capital reallocation market opens. And presumably, the banks on the high productive island is going to have the incentive to purchase more capital on the capital reallocation market, while the banks on the low productive island will have the incentive to sell. Okay, and I use this RA to denote the total amount of capital reallocation from low to high productive firm. However, during this sub-period, it's very important to realize that actually these banks need to purchase make the purchase of these capitals on the capital reallocation market through issuing bank credit. Why? Because the production hasn't happened yet, and these banks hasn't received the repayment from the productive firms yet. Therefore, in order to be afford of these capital on the reallocation market, banks have to borrow. Okay. And in the second period, firms produce, and then after the production, firm will pay back the loans to the banks. And in the third sub-period, it's very important. It is exactly in this period the financial frictions kicks in, okay? And in this period, on the one hand, banks receive the repayment from the firms, and on the other hand, banks is going to make the repayment to its creditors, including the representative household and including the other interbank borrowing lending, right? But the financial friction is, by assumption in our model, is that before banks make the repayment to all its creditors, bank has the ability to default and steal a certain fraction of the bank asset and then completely run away, okay? And these creditors, actually, they are very, very smart. They expect that before they get into the loan contract, they expect that the banks will have the ability to abscond. Therefore, they must impose certain kind of limited commitment constraint in order to make sure that the banks will never have the incentive to abscond, okay? So, and this is going to be a very important frictions, okay? And in the last period, banks settled on all its loans and household consume and so on and so forth, okay? And I'm going to zoom in and specifically talk about this limited enforcement constraint. And the limited enforcement constraint simply says that the net worth of the bank should be always larger than or equal to the total amount of bank asset. We assume that banks can abscond with certain amount of bank asset. Will always be larger than or equal to the amount of bank asset the bankers can steal for any date and any state. If this is true, then the banks will never have the incentive to default, okay? And let me give you a quantitative example to help you to further develop your intuition. So suppose the first best investment amount is 1 million and its return is 10%. While the banker itself only have a net worth of 0.2 million, okay? And it can abscond with 50% of the capital. And the first best case scenario, the bankers need to borrow 1 minus 0.2, which is 0.8 million, in order to make the first best amount of the investment, okay? But let's calculate what is the total net worth for such first best scenarios by considering banks non-default versus default. If banks choose not to default, banks will have exactly the 1 million amount of investment. Part of it comes from its own net worth, and part of it comes from the borrowing, and multiplied by the gross investment return, which is 1.1, okay? And 1 period later, it's going to pay back the loans, and left with 0.3 million of the net worth. However, if bank default before paying back anything to its creditors, then the bank can have 0.5. Okay, obviously, in this case, bank will have the incentive to default. Okay, and therefore, ex ante, the creditors will never be willing to lend as much as $0.8 million to the banker. Okay, and let's see. So if the creditors, instead of lend the full amount of 0.8 million, lend less amount, 0.3 million, okay? In the non-default case, 0.2 own net worth plus this amount of loans multiplied by the gross return minus the principal and interest repayment, it is equal to the net worth of the 0.25. If a bank default, okay, bank is also going to get 0.25, okay? So in this case, bank is going to be indifferent between default or not default, okay? And that's to say, this limited enforcement argument or constraint is going to help us to determine actually the creditors is going to, at most, willing to lend 0.3 million to the bankers, okay? And let me summarize the takeaway message. So the takeaway message is that the possibility for bankers to default ex post actually limit the borrowing capacity of the banks ex ante. And if the banks have more borrowing, then the banks will have more incentive to default. And on the other hand, if banks have higher own net worth, then more likely the banks is going to be able to finance the first best borrowing amount. Okay, and this is exactly the intuition about this limited enforcement argument. And actually, I would like to go one step further And so this is the logic for the further implication is going to be the following. In the bad times, when banks' net worth get hit, okay, and then its borrowing capacity is going to be limited. And this is going to negatively affect its intermediation capacity. And therefore, it will increase the inefficiency of the capital reallocation. And this is going to be one of the key channels to cause large output loss and therefore great recessions in the economy. Okay, so this is a basic idea. Okay, so for the interest of time, I'm going to only talk about this main theorem from this paper, and then I will leave the quantitative analysis for your future reference if you go into the details of the paper. Okay, so we have this theorem in which the total state space can be characterized by three critical values: S hat, S bar, and S star. And let me tell you what does S mean. S is the total amount of liability of the banking sector normalized by the capital stock. You can consider this is a total amount of liability of the banking sector. Okay, and if the bank has a very little debt or liability to the household sector, we can see we are in this region, and we can achieve the first best outcome, in which the constraint on the high productive island and low productive island both are unbinded. Okay? While as the banks accumulate more and more debt and reach the second region here between S hat and S bar, then the constraint on the high productivity island is going to bind, while the constraint on the low productive island is not going to bind. So the reason why high productive island is going to more likely to bind is because high productive island banks are going to have more incentive to borrow, because it want more, it is this bank want more capital to make the investment, to enjoy high returns, right? And if the more this bank borrow, the more incentive this bank is going to default. And this will make the constraint to be more easily to bind. Okay? And when the bank's debt level continue to increase to the third region, then the constraints on the both islands are going to bind. Okay? So this is a basic structure of this state space. Okay? I would like to emphasize two takeaway messages. First, on the cross-section, the high productive islands are more likely to bind. This is exactly the intuition which caused the capital misallocation. Why? Because presumably, when high productive island receive good productivity shock, it is in great need of additional capital. But during this time, the banks subject to this limited commitment constraint, do not have such ability to borrow more from low productive island. And this is going to cause the capital misallocation, cause the fact that more productive firms cannot get enough capital to produce. Okay, so this is one thing. The second thing is that on the extreme cases when the banks have extremely large amount of liability, okay, and both constraints bind. In this situation, there will be some productive asset which are completely underutilized, and we consider this as an extreme case of the capital misallocation. And we map this period into the crisis period. Okay. And we have very nice quantitative result, but due to the, for this interest of time, I'm not going to talk about it, and instead I'm going to directly wrap up. So to summarize, we have a model which emphasizes that financial intermediation can have a very large impact on the real economy as well as the asset prices. And the capital reallocation channel is quantitatively very important. And also, we can generate a model of endogenous time variation in aggregate and idiosyncratic volatility. And we have this very nice recursive policy function iteration solution method, which can potentially be applied to other models. And extensions include some asset pricing implications and also some discussions in terms of policy issues. Okay, so that's all for my presentation, and all the questions are very welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I understood your line plot before,
Yes,
that's just the total system leverage, right?
that is
Leverage.
that is total system leverage. Yes.
That's the total, keep going back. One more, back.
Yes,
There.
here it is.
Okay, whoop. Okay, S is the total system leverage,
Leverage.
right?
Yes.
What causes the system leverage to get from the good part to the bad part?
Yeah.
What in the internal structure of the model
Yes, exactly.
makes the system
Yes,
leverage go
exactly.
like that? And apparently when system leverage gets way up like that, lots of bad things happen.
Yes, exactly.
Which is easy enough to believe.
So yes, so in our model, there are two fundamental drivers of the shocks. One shock is this exogenous productivity shock. And I haven't had time to establish, so these critical values is going to be an increasing function of this aggregate exogenous productivity shock, which means that when we get a negative productivity shock in the bad times, actually, all these critical values are going to shift to the left-hand side, and the economy is going to have more possibility to the constraint to bind. Okay, so this is one. The second one is the financial shocks, and these financial shocks we have this financial shocks which is considered as some discount rate shocks which affect the financial intermediaries, and if the discount rate shock hits, it also is going to significantly change the leverage ratio. Why? Because it will affect the value of net worth of the banks.
These are just exogenous shocks that are pushing these things around.
Yes.
Gosh knows where these shocks come from. And isn't it the job of the Federal Reserve to sort of smooth out, stop this sort of thing from happening when it does happen?
Yeah, I think that is that point out a very good direction. So this is related to our
the central
banks. Yeah, because we do not have a central bank here, but presumably central bank need to have a role whenever we get hit negatively by these kind of shocks. How central bank could do in order to restore the inefficiency. Increase of the inefficiency of capital reallocation. Yes, that's on our future agenda. This is a good question.
So maybe Ben Bernanke did it, huh?
Yeah.
If not, then let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.